The Buchenwald concentration camp was located on Mount Ettersberg, near Weimar, in the German state of Thuringia, not far from the museum of the great German poet Goethe. It was established in 1937 by order of the SS leadership to hold political prisoners, as well as Jews, gypsies, and sexual minorities alien to German society. On July 15, 1937, the first 149 prisoners were transferred here from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and 2 weeks later, prisoners from the liquidated concentration camps in Sachsenburg and Lichtenberg were brought here. In fact, the camp was built by these prisoners. Interestingly, the residents of the surrounding area were deeply indignant, not at the very appearance of the concentration camp, but at its name, Ettersberg, which was associated with Goethe, so in July the name was changed to Buchenwald. By the end of 1937, over 2,500 prisoners were held here. At the beginning of the following year, the inscription, "To each his own," was forged on the inside of the gate. These words are an interpretation of one of the principles of Roman law: to live honestly, not to traumatize anyone, to give to each his own. In the same year, the camp was equipped with torture and execution rooms. A separate category of prisoners included Jews, who were subjected to special humiliation and abuse. In 1939, the concentration camps became self-supporting enterprises. The costs of keeping prisoners were drastically reduced. Forced labor of prisoners was used in production, in agriculture and mines. By comparison, in the first months, food rations were calculated to keep the free labor force alive. However, the situation systematically deteriorated, and by 1944, some categories of prisoners were not receiving any food at all. In fact, Buchenwald became not just a camp, but the administrative center of a whole web of death factories. The first inmates of Buchenwald were Germans themselves, especially communists and social democrats. Executions were still rare at first, but each year the order at Beech Grove became stricter. After the outbreak of World War II, the Nazis began sending prisoners from German-occupied countries to Buchenwald, for whom a special area was set aside. It was called a special camp, and the conditions were even more severe. In each of the 12 barracks, converted from stables with an area of 40 by 50 meters, about 750 prisoners were kept. By February 1940, nearly 1,500 of the 3,000 people placed in this area had died. The exact number of deaths in this zone is unknown. It is believed that about 100 prisoners died each day. There was no time to dig graves for the dead, so the Buchenwald authorities decided to build their own crematorium, which was already in use in the summer. The status of the camp changed after the German invasion of the Soviet Union. In the fall of 1941, a camp for Soviet prisoners of war was built in Buchenwald. They were dressed in striped prisoner uniforms with a distinctive red triangle on the left side of the chest, in which the letter R was inscribed. The red triangle signified that the prisoner was political, and the letter R signified Russian. In February 1942 in Germany, at military factories, began the creation of external camps, where prisoners of Buchenwald were transported for work. The most famous of them was Dora, where in underground tunnels were produced missiles Pfau-2, the so-called weapon of retaliation, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. After the end of the war, the burial of 25,000 prisoners, mostly citizens of the USSR, France, and Poland, was discovered in the camp. Another 5,000 people were shot before the advance of the American army. In Buchenwald, medical experiments on prisoners began in 1942. To test the effect of vaccines developed at the institutes in Marburg and Berlin, prisoners were infected with tuberculosis, typhus, yellow fever, smallpox, and cholera. To get more accurate statistics, a quarter of those infected were not given any medicine at all. The exact number of deaths resulting from these experiments cannot be calculated. In 1943, a brothel was organized in one of the barracks by order of the leadership. 19 women were sent here from the Ravensbrück women's concentration camp and forced into prostitution on a daily basis. Visiting the brothel was used as an incentive. This right was given to prisoners who assisted the camp authorities. Jews, gypsies, and Soviet prisoners of war were forbidden to enter the special barracks. At the same time, however, prisoners from various countries organized an anti-fascist committee in Buchenwald, whose main task was to prepare an uprising. The prisoners used various methods to obtain and hide telephone sets and wires, tools, firearms and cold weapons, and hand grenades. The members of the committee managed to equip an infirmary where, despite the prohibitions of the camp authorities, medical aid was secretly provided to Soviet prisoners of war, Jews and Poles. Between January and March of '45, more than 19,000 prisoners, mostly Jews from concentration camps in Poland, including Auschwitz, arrived at Buchenwald. By this time, Buchenwald had become the largest concentration camp in Germany. In February 1945, there were 112,000 prisoners in the Buchenwald camp system, including the outer camps. And in April, the Buchenwald authorities received an order from SS Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler to liquidate the camp, which at that time had about 50,000 prisoners. From April 7 to April 10th, 28,000 people were sent to camps in Bavaria and the Czech Republic. Those who died during the transfer were not even counted. From 1937 to 1945, about 250,000 prisoners of almost all European nationalities passed through Buchenwald. Among the prisoners were more than 23,000 Soviet prisoners of war and citizens of the USSR who were taken to Germany. During this time, 8,500 Soviet POWs were shot. As a result of torture medical experiments and exhaustion in Buchenwald, died about 56,000 people. 21,000 prisoners survived until liberation in the camp. Word spread among the remaining prisoners that they were to be exterminated. But already on April 11th, the anti-fascist committee was able to get in touch with the American troops in the vicinity. The signal for an uprising was then given. Armed prisoners captured the sentries, occupied the observation towers, hung a white flag over the camp gates, and announced the seizure of power. The camp guards offered little resistance. On April 13th, the leadership of the camp was handed over to a representative of the American troops who had liberated Weimar the day before. But the history of Buchenwald did not end with the fall of the Nazi regime. According to one version, in August 1945 in the camp, which was in the zone of influence of the USSR, was created Soviet Special Camp No. 2. Some historians claim that it held those who had recently sent prisoners to Beech Grove, former members of the Nazi Party. In February 1950, shortly after the formation of the GDR, the camp was disbanded. It was then almost completely destroyed, and its grounds were closed to the public for a long time. Today, Buchenwald is a museum, and the memory of those who died within its walls or on the way to it.